Let us pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, we ask you to be with us as we explore the story of your passion. Please send your Holy Spirit to guide and direct us in this time together. Please help us to be open to the word that is spoken to us and to listen that we might know you more clearly, love you more dearly, follow you more dearly. And we pray together. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, do I dare ask, are there any questions from last week? If you would take your Bibles and turn to Luke chapter 22. Last week we talked about the institution of the Eucharist at the Last Supper, and then we finally got to the betrayal, and so today we are on verse 24.
What chapter?
22. Chapter 22, verse 24. Then an argument broke out among them about which of them should be regarded as the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in authority over them are addressed
It can't be that way with you.
as benefactors. But among you it shall not be so. Rather let the greatest among you be as the youngest, and the leader as the servant. For who is greater, the one seated at table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who serves? It is you who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer a kingdom on you, just as my Father has conferred one on me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So, who's important? That's the question. The seating arrangement at a Jewish feast was very definite. The table was arranged in a square with one side left open. At the top of the side, at the top side of the square, at the center sat the host. Okay? So you have no markers. Okay? You have something like this. The tables are arranged this way, and this one at the bottom is empty. No one's sitting there. The host is sitting up here, and then you have someone at the right and someone at the left.
They're not sitting.
And then you go down the line. The next person sits here, the next person sits there, the next person there, the next person there, and so on. So if you were at that front table, you were kind of honored. Okay, it was not sit where you want, but you were invited to sit at certain places. So Luke introduces this episode so that he could give instructions for those who will minister at the Eucharist, those who will preside at the Eucharist. They must remember that the Eucharist makes Jesus the servant present. And so don't seek the highest seats. Be aware that that Jesus is the host at the banquet. Kind of interesting that they would be arguing about this in the middle of the Passover meal, when Jesus is giving them his body broken, his blood shed, and and then they argue about who's important. Jesus is pouring out his life for them, and then they're wondering who's more important. Question?
Just that the picture above you depicts that Leo DiBarto's
Yep.
Da Vinci's picture.
Yep, the picture of the Last Supper depicts that.
That's the first.
Except that it's everybody sitting in a straight row, so it really doesn't, because it should be a square, shorter tables made into a square. Okay, then we come to the part where Peter denies Jesus. Jesus says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded to sift all of you like wheat. But I have prayed that your own faith may not fail. And once you have turned back, you must strengthen your brothers. He said to him, Lord, I am prepared to go to prison and to die with you. But he replied, I tell you, Peter, before the cock crows this day, you will deny me 3 times. And so Peter is not lacking faith. But Jesus is predicting that Peter will act out of cowardice. Not a loss of faith, not really a loss of love. But when the push came to shove, he became a coward. It's not that he is losing his faith in Jesus. And though we criticize Peter and we say, well, look, he denied Jesus just like Judas betrayed Jesus, there is a world of difference between the two. Judas outright betrayed Jesus. You know, he gave up on him. Jesus did not fit into Judas' agenda. But Peter is with Jesus. It's just that at the last moment, when he's out there, he will turn coward. We must remember that he didn't become a coward right away. He did. Peter and John both are braver than the rest. They both followed Jesus out into the courtyard, and then when the questioning happens is when Peter turns coward. And so Jesus goes on then in verse 35 to give them instructions. He said to them, when I sent you forth without a money bag or sack or sandals, were you in need of anything? No, nothing, they replied. He said to them, but now one who has a money bag should take it, and likewise a sack, and one who does not have a sword should sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you that the scripture must be fulfilled in me, namely, he was counted among the wicked, and indeed what is written about me is coming to fulfillment. But they said, Lord, look, there are 2 swords here. But he replied, it is enough. It's like he's had enough. The 2 swords represent a way of life that involves fighting. The 1 sword he tells them to take would be for self-defense. But then they're like, oh, there's 2 swords here. He's like, this is enough. Let's not talk about fighting. Let's not talk about violence. This is not what I came for. And so he's telling them that in your communities, Luke is writing this not just to tell the story. He's writing this as a message to the Christian people. This is what you are going to suffer. This is what it means to follow Jesus. So as you read the story, you don't just read it that, well, Jesus told the apostles this, Jesus admonished them, and he encouraged them, and he did all that to the apostles. It's like Jesus is telling the Christian community, you are going to suffer. And the disciples are kind of dense, and they fail to grasp the message. That the model he gave them has to be repeated and updated because of circumstances. And the sword is the shorthand for those circumstances. You are going to suffer, and it's not about retaliation. Okay. That brings us to the end of last week's lesson. Okay? And so now we come to today's lesson. Okay? Jesus goes out to the garden. Then going out, he went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he arrived at the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not undergo the test." After withdrawing about a stone's throw from them and kneeling, he prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing, take the cup away from me. Still not my will, but yours be done." And to strengthen him, an angel from heaven appeared to him. He was in such agony, and he prayed so fervently that his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer and returned to his disciples, he found them sleeping from grief. He said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not undergo the test." We don't know for sure, but tradition suggests that the garden used by Jesus belonged to Mark's family. I don't know how they get that information, but it suggests that it belonged to the evangelist Mark. Now, what do we know about Mark? He wrote one of the Gospels. He was not an apostle. He only appears once in the Gospels, and that's in the Gospel of Mark. And when you go to the Gospel of Mark and you read about the agony in the garden, it says that there was a man there with just a white sheet wrapped around himself, and when the soldiers came to arrest Jesus, he got so scared he let the sheet drop off of him and he ran naked out of the garden. There you go, that's Mark. So it must have been his family's garden that he was there, okay? The word agony is a Greek word used for someone fighting a battle with total fear. Okay? So Jesus in the garden fighting a battle, the battle being, I don't want to die, I want to do the Father's will. Have you ever struggled like that? I don't want to do this, I don't want to do it, but I do want to do what God wants me to do. Have you ever fought such a battle? The streets of Jerusalem itself were too crowded for people to have gardens. Many well-to-do people had private gardens on the Mount of Olives. So I think we said last week you have the Mount of Olives on the east, and then you have a big dip, a valley, the Kidron Valley, and on the other side is the city of Jerusalem. So the wealthy people had their homes in Jerusalem, but then they would come across and have a beautiful garden up on the Mount of Olives. They would have private gardens, and a wealthy friend must have allowed Jesus to use his garden from time to time. So we believe Jesus didn't come there just this time, the first time. This was not the first time that he came quite a few times, and someone had a garden and let him use it. The prosperous owners would use the walled gardens as a source of income from the olive harvest as well as a place of retreat. The olive trees, if you've probably been to Door County, you've seen the cherry orchards. The trees are not that tall, but they're just laden with fruit in a good season. The olive trees look very, very much like cherry trees. And the olive is their great export crop. And so at the time of Jesus too, they would have a lot of those trees, and they would no doubt harvest the crop and sell it. Today in that garden, there are 4 trees that they have determined are 2,000 years old. And 4 trees that would have been there at the time of Jesus. And of course, I had my picture taken with a friend by one of those trees. In that garden today also, or I should say on the Mount of Olives, there is a big, not a huge church compared to some, but a big church that because it's on the Mount of Olives, you can see it. You can be in so many parts of Jerusalem, and you can look out to the east and you can see that church. And it's called the Church of All Nations. And inside the church, whenever or most often when you see a picture of Jesus in his agony, you see him kneeling against a rock. Well, which rock? Well, they have determined, tradition has determined, that they know the rock that Jesus would have prayed against. And it's the church, the sanctuary of the church has the rock. And the rock is, the bottom of the rock is at the bottom of the church. So the top of the rock is, the floor is built around the top of the rock. And so you have the altar, and the base of the altar is shaped like a chalice. And then you have this big, big stone, and all around it are chairs. Then we sat on the chairs during Mass. And the church is always dimly lighted. Now that rock would be the size, if you take these 4 pillars, that would be the rock. Yeah, not kidding. And then around those would be the chairs we had for Mass, and up front would be the altar, at the base of it shaped like a chalice. And so the church is always dimly lighted to remind people that Jesus was praying in basically in the dark and looking over the city of Jerusalem. And there he would have seen, I would guess, a lot of light because thousands of people were arriving for Passover time, and they would be lighting little campfires and so on. There'd be a lot of activity and a lot of noise, I would guess, in Jerusalem. And Jesus is kneeling there, looking out over the whole scene, knowing that his own people whom he loves are going to, call out for his crucifixion. While we were in that church, we had Mass. Father Don was our celebrant, our presider. And in the middle of the Mass, a very touching thing happened. We were alone, our group of about 40, we were alone. And it was after the consecration, I think, a group of people walked in, and Father knew they were from Vietnam. And so he motioned them to come over. And then there was a railing. There's the stone, the chairs, and then a railing all around it. And he motioned them to come over, so they came and stood behind that railing. And he immediately changed from English to Latin, a universal language. So, and I remember the touching thing was the sign of peace, when we were reaching literally across a boundary line to welcome these people, and then he invited them to come to communion. It was a very touching thing, and it's called the Church of All Nations. It's just a very beautiful experience. And of course, all of us oldie goldies, we knew the Latin, so that was not a big deal. Okay, so Jesus goes to that garden and prays, and he prays in the garden called Gethsemane. Gethsemane means wine press. That's what the name means, wine press. And just as grapes were crushed in the wine press, so Jesus would be crushed that night by the thought of what he was going to suffer. And so what you have then are Mount Olivet, or the Mount of Olives, and the Kidron Valley, and Mount Zion, where the temple is, and the city of Jerusalem. And those two mounts become the peak experiences of the Passion story. Now, when Luke wrote this story, he has some distinctive features. Luke does not say that Jesus prayed 3 times. He centers all attention on Jesus' one single prayer. Secondly, he brackets that prayer before and after with speaking to his disciples. Third, his agony in prayer is not the result of being frightened senseless by the thought of death. His agony is in the gathering of all his strength and resolve to be obedient. So the agony is not about thinking about his death. Oh, this such and such is going to happen to me. His agony is about gathering the strength within him to be obedient to his Father's will and to stand the test of the crucifixion. And in this struggle with the power of darkness, it is Luke that mentions that an angel comes to him. And then lastly, Luke kind of excuses the disciples. He does not give the impression that the disciples didn't care or they were, failing to follow Jesus. He excuses the disciples to watch with Jesus. He uses the words, they were sleeping with grief. They were sleeping with grief. So he has pity on the disciples, rather than giving the hint that, well, they're not being faithful to Jesus. They're not staying with him to the end. Okay, stop and take a look at your own life. When is the time, I think all of us have to look back and find times when we've wrestled, really wrestled with what God was calling us to do. And we knew deep in our gut, we knew what God wanted. But, on the outside, there were a lot of reasons not to do it. When have you wrestled with the will of God, accepting something, being obedient, and it was painful, and you didn't want to? Talk about that at your table.
My hearing aid went out last week and sleepwalking from here to church. And this is a normal hearing. Oh, okay. And I don't have more than one year. This here's pretty good. But one of the characteristics I have is I generate a lot of hearing. You don't have hearing aids, do you?
No, I have excellent hearing. I'm lucky that way.
What?
Yeah. What'd you say? No, I'm lucky. I have very good hearing, and because I love music, you know, so it's nice to hear the whole range. You know, at least I think I'm hearing the whole range.
When you're in surgery with other people, is there a lot of conversation?
I think it depends on the surgeon. Some people don't like that. I
I
like
mean, like,
that.
to be conversational.
They want to be quiet. Just pay attention to what we're doing here. I didn't want
Well,
music.
the sense that I had, if they were looking for instruments in the search.
Okay, I hope you've had a chance to share a few brief but meaningful stories. Actually, the week we were in the Holy Land for me was the 10th year anniversary for me of something that had happened in 1988. And so that whole week I was kind of celebrating. I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's a very personal story. But
Come on.
but in 1988, I really was struggling with something, and it involved a major change in my life in June of 1988 in the course of a retreat. So retreats aren't always so comfortable and relaxing and restful, and and you're high on God and everything's wonderful. Retreats can be very challenging, and that one was. And it brought about a major change in my life. And so this was 10 years ago exactly that week. And I remember on June 16th, 1988, I had said to God, okay, I'll do what you're asking. And 10 years later, we were in the Garden of Gethsemane. So in 1988, I struggled and finally said, God, I want what you want. And 10 years to the day, I was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and when the Mass was over, most people flopped to their knees. As soon as that last song was sung, people just flopped to their knees and grabbed the rock. And I remember I held on to the rock, and silently I renewed my vows. Very, very special moment. We got to the point on the trip where just touch everything, so you can come home and say you touched it. Well, I not only touched it, I held my hand there and renewed my vows. It was a very touching moment. But when you are in Jerusalem, you can see from a long distance away, you can see that church. And the front of it is facing the city of Jerusalem. It's just a very special place. Okay, so then we go on. While he was still speaking, a crowd approached, and in front was one of the 12, a man named Judas. He went up to Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? His disciples realized what was about to happen, and they asked, Lord, here we go again. Lord, shall we strike with the sword? They still don't get it. Jesus was not a violent person, and they're ready to be violent. And one of them struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said in reply, stop, no more of this. Then he touched the servant's ear and healed him. And Jesus said to the chief priests and temple guards and elders who had come for him, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? Day after day I was with you in the temple area, and you did not seize me. But this is your hour, the time for the power of darkness. And so Judas found a way to betray Jesus in such a way that the authorities would come upon him when the crowd was not there. So he's not making this a public affair, but the arrest of Jesus is kind of a private affair. He's out in the garden in the dark by himself praying, and he comes with the authorities. Now, These are not the Roman soldiers. It's not the Roman government right now that is attacking Jesus. It's the temple guard. And the captain of the temple guard was the officially responsible for good order of the temple. And the captain of the temple here referred to was responsible for carrying out the actual arrest of Jesus. So what you have in Jerusalem is you have the temple. Today there's only one wall left, but you have the temple, and behind it and above it was a building called the Antonia Fortress. And that's where the soldiers, they could walk on the wall on top of it and keep guard over the temple. And so it was the captain of that temple guard that arrests Jesus. Now, as far as Judas is concerned, when a disciple met a beloved rabbi, he laid his right hand on the rabbi's left shoulder and his left hand on the rabbi's right shoulder and kissed him. So this was truly a sign of affection and a sign of great respect. So you basically just put your two hands out there on the rabbi's shoulders and you kissed him. It was the kiss of a disciple to a beloved master. And that's the kind of kiss Judas uses to betray Jesus, which makes it all the more hurtful. Because he is doing an action that is a sign of great respect and honor, and instead, it's a sign of giving you away. Basically saying, I don't believe in you, and I don't believe in your teachings, and I'm not going to follow you. And so when we come to this arrest, there are several different parties involved. There are 4 parties involved. First of all, there is Judas the traitor. He had abandoned God. He had abandoned what Jesus was attempting to do. I might have mentioned this before, but there's a good novel out there. It's not a new one. A good novel out there called I, Judas. And it's written by a woman by the name of Taylor Caldwell. She's written several books. And the whole book is written of Judas is speaking. So as you read the book, you go through the story of Jesus told from the vantage point of Judas. And so you get the whole gospel in that novel. And at the very end of the novel, there obviously is no conversion. At the end of the novel, Judas is saying, you know, it's really too bad that Jesus didn't get it. Okay, so Judas is speaking from the vantage point that Jesus had all the ability to get the Romans out of Israel. Jesus had all the ability to conquer what the Romans were trying to do, namely build a great empire that stretched around the Mediterranean Sea. Jesus had all the power in the world to get the Romans out of Israel and let Israel be the #1 country, you know, make Israel great again. I heard that. Make Israel great again. And Jesus had all the ability to do that, and the poor guy didn't get it. And it's just too bad that his life ended up on the cross. So if you want some good reading for Holy Week or for Lent, I know the book is I'm sure it's at the public library. Taylor Caldwell, I, Judas. So there's Judas the traitor. He has abandoned Jesus. He has abandoned God. Then there are the Jews. they came to arrest Jesus. They were blind to God. They had so long chosen their own way that they could not recognize God incarnate among them. So it's the Jewish people that lead the temple guard to Jesus. They have given up. They have given up believing what Jesus was teaching. They had their own way of running their religion, so to speak, and they could not recognize God among them. And then there are the disciples. For the moment, they had forgotten God. And they were utterly terrified, completely disorganized. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what to think. When you think of it, middle of the night, they're tired. It's late, and this horrific thing is happening, and they're all disoriented. They don't know what's going on. And then there's Jesus. And Jesus remembered God. He went to his trial once this ordeal was over, and he goes, even though he has been in agony, real agony, throughout the night, praying to God, discerning what God is really asking of him, knowing he needs to be obedient and wants to be obedient. By the time they arrest him, he is fearful, I'm sure, but inside there is that deep peace. He is doing what God wants him to do. So he goes with perfect serenity. And he, no matter what happens to him, because he is at peace, he can be in control. No matter what they do to him, they can beat him to a pulp, but he is in control of his own destiny. And again, you can stop and think about maybe that little story you might have shared or heard at your table. When you have struggled with the will of God, and what you're asked to do is very difficult. When you finally say, in so many words, your will be done, no matter what's going on around you, and no matter what this decision is leading you to undergo, inside of you is great peace. I remember that day, June 16th, 1988, when I had come to a decision. Okay, I will let God turn my summer around. I'll do this. My retreat director the next day said to me, "You don't have to tell me anything. Your body language has changed." She said, "The way you're walking is different." She's very perceptive. He said, "Your body language has changed. The way you are walking tells me you are at peace." And it was like, no, my whole life was like, oh my gosh. And, but inside it was like, okay, this is what God wants, I'll do it. And so Jesus, as he goes to his passion, he's got all this horrific stuff ahead of him, but inside, his body will, on the outside, will be beaten, but his spirit inside is calm and at peace, and he's in control. As much as it looks like he's out of control, as they beat him and torture him, he is in control of his own destiny. And so there's not a single Roman soldier involved. It is an affair between Jesus and the teachers of the Jewish law. And Luke presents Jesus as a teacher who is in command of the situation
and is not seized until his teaching is finished. And his last teaching is when when one of the disciples, it doesn't say Peter, it just says one of the disciples strikes, and the soldier cuts off his ear. The last teaching of Jesus is, stop it. We're not about violence, is what he's saying. Stop what you're doing, takes the ear, heals the soldier's body, and says, that's enough. That's enough. And what he means is that's enough of talking about retaliation and violence. Jesus comes as the peaceful Messiah. And so that's the last bit of teaching he does in Luke's gospel. You will not exercise violence, even though violence is coming against you. He is not a political Messiah. He will not sanction physical violence, and he will not use that. He will not use that to escape death. I would imagine the disciple who cut off the ear was doing that not only to hurt, but as a threat. See what we can do? We can kill all you guys. You come with your swords, we can come with ours. We can kill you. And Jesus says, enough of that. We do not use physical violence. And don't try to help me escape from death. He has now resigned himself to the fact that it's going to happen, and not resigned in the fact that, okay, I lost the battle, let it be. But he is deliberately choosing to go to his death. And he illustrates this, that his mission is one of peace by healing the servant's ear. It's the only miracle performed during his last days in Jerusalem. So this will be the last miracle you hear about in Luke's gospel. Okay, finally we come to Peter's denials. After arresting him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter was following at a distance. They lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat around it, and Peter sat down with them. When a maid saw him seated in the light, she looked intently at him and said, "This man too was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." A short while later, someone else saw him and said, "You too are one of them." But Peter answered, "My friend, I am not." About an hour later, still another insisted, "Assuredly, this man too was with him, for he also is a Galilean." But Peter said, "My friend, I do not know what you are talking about." Just as he was saying this, the cock crowed, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times." He went out and began to weep bitterly. The men who held Jesus in custody were ridiculing and beating him. They blindfolded him and questioned him, saying, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" And they reviled him in saying many other things against him. So here you have Peter and Jesus very close, physically very close to each other. So Peter loves Jesus. We have to remember Judas is gone. The other apostles are gone. John and Peter are the only ones remaining. And Peter's affection for Jesus draws him close to Jesus. It puts him right in the middle of the scene. And he sat among hostile people with Roman soldiers now keeping guard. And it's not that Peter's faith failed him. It's the fear, the cowardice. And Peter starts out by saying, I don't know what you are talking about. And you see a progression here. First he says, I do not know what you are talking about. It's like, I don't know, just get me out of this. I don't know what you're talking about. And when they keep pressing the question, he finally says, I do not know him. Do you see the difference between saying, I don't know what you're talking about, and I do not know him? It's pinpointed right at the person of Jesus. From I don't know what you're talking about, I don't know the situation, I don't know what's going on, to I don't know him. And that's when Jesus looks at Peter. Luke does not tell. In other Gospels, you may read that Peter was cursing and swearing that he did not know Jesus and leave me alone and all of that. The cursing and swearing are left out of Luke's Gospel. And it's Luke alone who reports that the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And then it says that Peter remembered the words that Jesus spoke to him. And remember meant more than recall. Oh yeah, Jesus said that to me. Before the cock crows, you'll deny me 3 times. Remembering was more than, oh yeah, Jesus said those words to me and now it's happening. Remembering was that deep down feeling that Jesus told me I would do it, and doggone it, without realizing it, I've done it. I denied him 3 times. So those words, it wasn't only the words, it's the look that Jesus gave him, just made him crumble inside. He has done what he really promised he would never do. Peter at that moment must have felt like a total failure. At the crucial moment in Jesus' life, in my life, I betrayed my dearest friend. So it's more than recalling, oh yeah, Jesus said that. It's remembering deep down inside that Jesus was right. At the crucial moment, I turned away from him. I denied having anything to do with him. I basically have denied our friendship. And he goes out and he weeps bitterly. Okay. I have gotten to the end of what I had prepared for today, but I don't want you to leave. No. Just, it's one thing to come to a Bible class and say, oh, that was interesting. Oh, I learned that about the Passion. Oh, that's an interesting detail. Or that's, would you talk at your tables? What's 1 or 2 things that struck you today as we talked about from the time Jesus enters his agony in the garden through the time he is arrested and Peter denies him? What's 1 or 2 things that really struck you and you want to remember that?
It's hard for me to react to her question, but I think she's trying to put a personal touch to it. She brings individuals in, and her reading of it, I'm sure,
I guess one takeaway I would have is that he was the most vocal supporter of Jesus and submissive to him. He could do it. It's pretty hard for us not to under pressure.
I think the different people portrayed Judas, Peter, and later Pilate and Herod, they all seem to have more of a human nature to them. The doubting of Pilate and Herod's packaging, agreeing with his other developed her own approach to it and how she presents it. And she's presented this to other people, other nuns.
Right.
But I think.
Okay, before you leave, there is one little, detail I wanna tell you. You know, the trial involves different people and different scenes. And as you read one gospel and then another and another and another, there are some discrepancies in the details. But what will happen is it's nighttime and they'll go to the high priest, who is the highest person in the Jewish government, so to speak. The high priest was the authority in the Jewish world. And they will go to that high priest. And then the question becomes, well, and then it'll say, and in the morning they led him away. What happened during the night? That becomes the question. In Jerusalem, there is a rather new church, a beautiful church, not real big, and it's called the Church of St. Peter Gallicantu. And it is built near the place where Peter would have denied Jesus. And on top, there are two steeples on the church. On one steeple is a cross, on the other steeple is a rooster. So as you come to that church, you know this is the church of the denial. Next to the church, outside, and a few feet away from the church, are big stone steps that go up to what would have been the high priest's house. And what they told us they're big blocks of stone. And what they told us as we were climbing those steps are, it's been 2,000 years since Jesus died, and over the years, a lot of things have been replaced. Stones fall out of buildings, stones are replaced, or a building is taken down and built over, etc. It's hard for us to realize in America, which is a rather young, U.S. is a young country, cities sink, towns sink, and you have to go way down to excavate and find remains of buildings. But anyway, they said a lot of things have been replaced over the years, but we know this for sure. As you climb these big stones to the high priest's house, we know that these steps have not been replaced. So as you walk these steps to the high priest's house, you are literally walking in the footsteps of Jesus. Whereupon I said to myself, I am never going to throw these shoes away. I have them in a shoebox in my bedroom because, they're tennis shoes, sport shoes, and there's grooves in the bottom. There might be a couple grains of sand that his feet touch. So I would never throw those shoes away. And of course, when I tell this story to little children, what do they ask? Can we see them? So I show them my shoes. And then I say, isn't the grains of sand that are important? What about the Eucharist? And with that, we will close. Thank you. See you next week.